Support Pause and Support Gear by Sunset Cougar. Chapter 4 Meetings. Trigger warning for explosions and fire for this chapter. Today was the day that Shinso and Mei would meet. Izuku wondered if the police were going to be called. They probably were. The three of them had chosen a nice neutral ground as their meeting place, the mall. Izu! Izuku grinned when he saw Mei running towards him. Evidently, her parents forced her to shower and change before coming, since she was wearing clean clothes and he didn't see a speck of grease on her. It was an odd sight. Hey, Mei. Shinso should be here soon. I am suddenly regretting my decision to come, Shinso announced as he came up behind them. After they greeted each other, they set off on their grand quest. The first store they stopped at, of course, Hot Topic. "'Tis the store of my people," Shinso declared as he looked over the selection. Can you please help me find something with a cat on it?" "Of course," Izuku and Mei agreed. From the looks they got as they looked around the store, the patrons knew they most definitely weren't the regular sort of customer. "Do you think my mom would have a heart attack if I bought this?" Izuku asked, holding up a spiked choker necklace. "Most definitely," Mei nodded. Shinso smirked. "You could buy a leash too. That'd be kinky." Izuku and Mei burst out into laughter. He didn't buy the necklace, but instead got a hair clip with a skull on it. He hadn't gotten a haircut since he jumped, and his hair was getting longer. Mei didn't buy anything. 2 hours and several stores later, they found themselves at the food court. Shinso had gone off to get pizza for the three of them, and Izuku was buried in his phone. That was why he didn't notice Mei noticing the shiny new electronics store nearby, nor did he notice as she slipped away to go check it out. He did, however, notice the explosion and screams moments after Shinso got back with the food. An hour later, and all three friends were sitting in the police station, Mei covered in soot. "How did this happen?" Aizawa, one of Shinso's parents, asked, pinching the bridge of his nose. Izuku was 90% sure he was Eraserhead, and was silently freaking out. "It was their fault," Shinso said, pointing at Izuku and Mei. "I had nothing to do with this," Izuku protested. "I didn't mean to make an explosion," Mei said. "I was just asking one of the people what kind of stuff was in an iPhone. I figured maybe I could buy one and take it apart for my babies. Then it just exploded." "I find that very hard to believe," Mei's mom, Kaio, said. "I'm telling the truth," Mei insisted, waving her arms and almost smacking Shinso. "Watch it," the purple egg grumbled, without much bite. "Sorry," Mei said before turning back to her parents with crossed arms. "I didn't mean to make it explode." "And yet it did, and the resulting fire burned down half the food court." Kaio sighed in exasperation. "What am I gonna do with you?" There was silence for a minute before Aizawa pointed at Izuku and said, "Wait a minute. Aren't you the kid who gave Hitoshi the taser?" Izuku nodded slowly. Aizawa groaned and put his head in his hands. "Out of all the people you could have befriended, why did you choose the loud, destructive ones?" Shinso raised an eyebrow. "Hypocrite." Inka looked very alarmed. "Izuku, you gave someone a taser?" "Yeah." "Oh my god!" A few days later, there was a headline about how a teenager, who remained anonymous, found a possibly fatal flaw in a new phone that had come out by way of making it explode. The phones were immediately recalled. Izuku's eyes trailed around the optometrist's office. Why was he here? Because his mother noticed that he seemed to be having trouble reading anything further away than about 5 feet. And when asked, he said it was blurry. Midoriya, the receptionist called, and Izuku and his mom stood and followed the woman to the doctor's office. About a week and a half later, Izuku got a new pair of large, round, black framed glasses. When his friends saw them, Mei said they suited him, and Shinso just stared for a solid 10 seconds, his cheeks getting red. Mei snapped him out of it with a whack on the back of his head. You, look very nice, Shinso said, cheeks still red. Thanks, Izuku smiled, the tips of his ears turning pink. Mei looked between them and smirked like the cat that caught the canary. 8 months after he met her, Izuku finally got to bring Clover home. He was overjoyed, feeling like he was on cloud 9 the entire time. In the car on the way back home, Clover kept her head on Izuku's lap. He brushed her happily as her tail wagged. She shed a lot, so he needed to brush her thoroughly every day. He didn't mind. In fact, he found it quite therapeutic. During their training, he had learned something else about Clover. She had a quirk called blast protection. She was immune to any aspect of an explosion, like fire, heat, shrapnel, or noise. None of it would hurt her. Izuku was thrilled. One of his big worries was that his service dog would get hurt because of the frequent explosions made by the things that Mei made. He also found it kind of ironic. The quirkless kid had a dog with a quirk. At the apartment building, they got out of the car and Izuku grabbed the handle of Clover's vest. It didn't take long to get to their apartment. Once Izuku was sitting on his bed, he took off Clover's vest so she could explore. She knew that if she wasn't wearing her vest, she wasn't working and could do what she wanted. Soon enough, Clover had sniffed every corner of the apartment and trotted over to the bed to lay at Izuku's feet. He called her up beside him, and after a brief moment of confusion, she joined him. She had never been allowed on furniture before, since some people didn't like it, and it was easier to break the training than to train the dog. So, what do you think of the apartment? I know it's not very big, but it's home. Clover wagged her tail and grinned as her tongue lolled. Izuku smiled. I guess you don't mind as long as you get lots of walks, huh? Clover wagged her tail harder and rolled over to show her belly. Izuku giggled and rubbed it. Excuse me, I need to hydrate for a sec. Chapter 5 Nightmares and Blizzards. Trigger warnings: nightmares, panic attacks, and minor animal harm. Everything was hazy. There were voices, but they sounded distant and muddled, like he was underwater. He faded in and out of consciousness, and every time he woke, he was somewhere new. He was in a dirty alley, his whole body pulsing with excruciating pain. People were pointing and yelling and he wished they would stop. He just wanted to die in peace. He was in an ambulance, paramedics swarming him. He's not breathing. He was being rushed through to bright hallways. He felt like he was floating. Maybe he would just float away. That would be nice. He was under the bright spotlight of an operating theater. We're losing him! Get the defibrillator! He jerked as electricity coursed through his body, trying to jumpstart his failing heart. Again! Everything went black. Izuku jerked awake from his nightmare, breathing ragged and covered in cold sweat. He didn't remember much from that day after he jumped, and the memories he did have mostly came as flashes in his nightmares. From what he had been told, it had been a fight to keep him alive. By the time the paramedics got to the alley, he had been almost dead, bleeding heavily and multiple broken bones and a collapsed lung. Between when he had been picked up and when they had finished operating, he had flatlined 5 separate times and almost bled out. It was a miracle he was still alive, but sometimes he wished they had just let him die. The wind howled as snow beat against the window in a steady rhythm. Izuku shivered in the cold. The heater had gone out, and the lack of sun was only making it colder. Izuku didn't bother moving to get under his blanket. Maybe I'll freeze to death. Wouldn't that be nice? He thought numbly, staring blankly at the darkness. It was nearing midnight, and his room was almost pitch black. His mom wasn't home. She was snowed in at work and would be staying overnight, since it was too dangerous to drive. The old familiar urges were coming back. The ones that said he should... Trigger warning. It didn't say it earlier, but apparently this chapter covers stuff like suicide and self-harm, so just want to make sure everyone does whatever they need to stay safe before I say this line and continue. Excuse me. The old familiar urges were coming back. The ones that said he should cut himself, kill himself. He rolled over and grabbed his phone as he trembled. He clicked the first number he saw on his contact list that wasn't his mom. He couldn't worry her anymore, and held the phone to his ear. The connection was horrible, but he could still make out the words. Hello? Izuku? Why are you calling in the middle of the night? Hitoshi's voice asked on the other end of the line. He sounded groggy. Izuku felt a stab of guilt. He must have woken him up. The guilt was made worse because he knew just how little the insomniac slept. Tears burned in Izuku's eyes. His mind was swirling and his thoughts felt louder than the wind outside. Hitoshi, he stuttered out. Please, I can't think. It's too loud. Please, help me. Everything's going to be fine, Izuku. Hitoshi sounded much more awake now, and Izuku could vaguely pick up movement in the background. Just hang on 15 minutes. Got it? Just 15 minutes. Suddenly Hitoshi hung up, and Izuku was left alone in the quiet. Hitoshi had hung up on him. Izuku buried his face in his pillow and started crying, curling in on himself. The bed dipped as Clover leapt up beside him and lay down, nudging her nose into his arms and whining. He cried harder as she desperately tried to lick his face and comfort him. He shoved her away harshly, but she was persistent, until finally he snapped and shoved her off the bed, screaming at her to get out. She slunk away, tail between her legs. Izuku fell back down, screaming into his mattress. She didn't deserve it. She didn't deserve to have his pain taken out on her. Izuku? A familiar voice said. It sounded foggy and far away. Izuku peeled open his eyes to see a smudge of purple in the dark. Who are you? He tried to say, but it came out as a whimper. Just breathe, Izu. It's me, Hitoshi. You're safe. Everything's okay. Slowly but surely, Hitoshi managed to draw Izuku out of his panic attack, and soon they were hugging as the greenette sobbed into his shoulder. What are you doing here? Izuku asked once his tears had finally faded. He needed help, so I grabbed my dad's coat and my boots and walked over. You walked 8 blocks in a blizzard? All for useless meat? You're not useless, Hitoshi said firmly. And yes, I did. Snuck out too. I left a note, but I have a feeling my parents are going to be pissed. Izuku laughed wetly. Then his mood fell. Clover, I yelled at her. I pushed her off the bed. Oh God, she must hate me. You'd be surprised how forgiving dogs can be, especially when they sense you've distressed. Excuse me, I need to take a drink. Hitoshi helped Izuku to the living room where Clover slowly slunk over, head down. Izuku immediately fell to his knees and started apologizing over and over, fresh tears in his eyes. True to Hitoshi's prediction, it only took a few moments for Clover to cuddle up to Izuku and start licking his tears away, tail wagging. They soon settled on the couch. Hitoshi had brought a bag of hand warmers, and they quickly stuffed a bunch of them under the blanket they were sharing. The heat felt nice. Since the electricity still worked, they set up a movie and cuddled as it played, arms wrapped around each other. Clover lay partially on Izuku's lap outside of the blanket, not bothered by the cold. Soon, they fell asleep. Izuku and Hitoshi jolted awake to the apartment door slamming open. They turned, eyes wide, to see their parents stalking towards them, snow dancing through the air as it fell from their clothes. Inka looked worried, while Hitoshi's parents had fury practically radiating off of them. Shinso Hitoshi! Hisashi yelled, his quirk just short of activating. What were you thinking? Sneaking off in a blizzard in the middle of the night? Izuku needed me, Hitoshi mumbled, and Izuku leaned into his side. Hitoshi put a hand on his back. I did, the grenade agreed. The bad thoughts were back. He helps keep them away. Are you alright, excuse me. Are you alright, baby? Inko asked, crouching down next to the couch. Izuku nodded. I'm fine now. I didn't hurt myself. Inko looked relieved. I'm glad. Shota groaned. Hitoshi, as heroic as what you did is, it doesn't change the fact that you snuck out in the middle of the night in a blizzard. You could have told us, and one of us would have come with you. I'm really sorry for worrying you. I wasn't really thinking in the moment. I'll take whatever punishment you give me, Hitoshi said, head down. You're grounded for 2 weeks, Shota said. The only reason it isn't more is because it was to help your friend. Hitoshi nodded. Fair enough. Izuku hummed happily as he connected the last wires and closed the panel. He had already made Hitoshi his Christmas gift, a set of noise-canceling wireless purple headphones with cat ears on top and paw prints along the band. May was harder. She was such a good inventor, it made it a lot harder to make something she would really like. He knew she had a particularly affinity for steampunk-style things, and his goggles kind of reminded him of an owl, so he combined the two. The result was a 6-inch tall steampunk owl that could turn its head and hoot. It also had glowing gold eyes. The 3 friends exchanged their presents a week before Christmas, and Hitoshi and May loved their gifts, and thanked Izuku happily. Izuku ignored the old fluttery feeling in his stomach when Hitoshi smiled at him. Maybe he was getting sick? From Hitoshi, Izuku got a small Eraserhead figure he had bought on Etsy. He remembered that Izuku had a particular affinity for the hero since he fought basically quirkless. When he unwrapped it, Izuku's eyes began filling with happy tears as he grinned wildly, thanking Hitoshi profusely. From May, Izuku received a new set of safety goggles, specifically made to block out bright flashes as well as debris. They also covered his ears and doubled as headphones. Izuku hugged her tightly and thanked her, happily, grinning like an idiot as his happy tears overflowed. She patted his head and said that she couldn't have her partner getting hurt. Christmas in the Midoriya household was always a rather quiet affair. Izuku and Inko would wake up early, eat breakfast, open their gifts, and then spend the rest of the day baking cookies and bonding. It was always enjoyable, and Izuku loved it. Clover also got a gift, a toy they could put treats into, so she had to work to get them out. She adored it, and was overall just happy because they were happy. Izuku and Inko made a special batch of dog cookies just for her. On New Year's Eve, the Midoriya, Yamada Aizawa, and Hatsume households gathered together in a park to watch the fireworks. As Izuku sipped his sparkling apple cider and watched the beautiful explosions of sparks, he realized he was happier than he had ever been before. He had lost his dream to be a hero, and most of the use of his legs, but he had gained friends, Clover, and a new dream. He smiled and knew that if he had the chance to go back and redo the past 2 years, he would turn it down in a heartbeat. He wouldn't trade his current life for the world. Chapter 6: Katsuki's Regret. Trigger warning for weapons, self-worth issues, bullying, and I'm going to assume probably mention of suicide attempt. So, with that said, do whatever you need to for yourself. I'm going to take a drink real quick and we'll start in on this chapter. Izuku was not looking forward to today. Why? Because he had to go back to school. As he walked to the train, Clover at his side, he reminded himself that it was just for 1 semester, and then he was done with middle school. He wished he could have continued doing it online, but alas he couldn't. He just hoped that if the bullies started picking on him again, maybe someone would intervene when they saw he was disabled, instead of ignoring him. He swallowed thickly as he stared up at Aldera. Just 1 semester, and then he would be going to UA. He had no doubts that he would make it in. He was a natural at making support equipment, and was much smarter than people gave him credit for. Izuku took a deep breath and put on a blank expression, summoning the confidence he had when he was around Hitoshi and Mei. He wasn't a weak, defenseless Deku anymore. The high-powered taser in his pocket attested to that. He had arrived early for 2 reasons. 1, so he could avoid the rush of traffic, and 2, so he wouldn't be late because he walked slower than most people. Soon enough, he was in his homeroom classroom in his assigned seat. It was in the back corner near the window. He sat down and told Clover to lay under the desk so she would be out of the way. He pulled a book out of his bag and started reading. Soon the class began to file in. They looked surprised to see him. Izuku ignored them. He only looked up from his book when 3 of his old bullies loomed over him, smirking. "What are you doing here, Deku?" the leader asked. "We thought you finally killed yourself." Izuku smiled sweetly. "Oh, I tried. Ended up in the hospital several times, in fact. So trust me, I've tried. And despite my best efforts, I'm still here." His tone was bitter and condescending, exactly what he had been going for. It caught the bully off guard. He wasn't used to Deku talking back. Well, Izuku wasn't Deku anymore, and he talked back all he liked. The bullies left him alone after that. Soon enough, class started, and Izuku blocked everything out. He already knew all of this. He had been reading ahead while he was stuck at home. Instead, he sketched out the rough blueprint for a voice-changing mask for Shinso once he got into the hero course. When Izuku had brought the idea up to the purple-haired teen, Shinso had admitted that he was muzzled when he was younger, and although he loved the idea, he wasn't sure he could handle it if he couldn't get it off. Hearing that, May had a suggested a solution, a failsafe. After a bit of brainstorming, they had come up with this. If he spoke a specific command, the mask would fall off immediately, and it would only react to said command if it came from inside the mask. They knew it needed to be something he would never say otherwise. In the end, they determined it would be Swiss cheese mice. Izuku was so engrossed in his work, he didn't see the teacher approaching until he tried to snatch his blueprint. Izuku grabbed it and pulled it closer to his chest defensively, the teacher glaring at him. "What is that? Do you think you can get away with not paying attention just because you've been gone for a while?" "No, Sensei," Izuku replied. "I already know what you're teaching, so I was working on something for a friend." "Really? How can a quirkless thing like you already know something so advanced?" Izuku bit back a snarky retort, reminding himself that he had to keep his record as clean as possible so he could get into UA. "I was stuck in my apartment for months with nothing else to do but study," Izuku replied with a shrug. The teacher scowled and told him to go to the board and solve the problems if he thought so highly of himself. Izuku stood and called Clover out from under his desk. He had no worries about her possibly being targeted by his bullies. May's mom was an absolutely terrifying lawyer and would help him and his mom sue whoever hurt her for animal cruelty. She said it was the least she could do for the kid who actually got May to socialize instead of spending all day in the garbage. Izuku ignored the whispering from his classmates as he picked up the chalk and started writing down the answers on the board. Katsuki couldn't tear his eyes off of the dog at Midoriya's side. She had a vest which read, "Service dog, do not pet." Midoriya was holding the handle on it. When he walked, his legs were weirdly stiff, like he was having trouble moving them. Katsuki's hands curled into fists, clenching his pants. He hadn't seen Midoriya for nearly 2 years. He hadn't seen him since he had told him to kill himself. He had been so scared that Midoriya had actually listened to what he had said. He didn't mean it, not really. He had been having a shitty week, and he had been so angry that the words came out before he could stop them. He had regretted them immediately, but hadn't apologized, and God, he wished he did. Midoriya finished off the last of the questions and stepped back so the teacher could look them over. Based on his expression, they were all right. Midoriya went back to his desk and his service dog went under it, curling up and apparently going to sleep. Midoriya pulled out the paper he had been drawing on and continued his work. His mouth moved as if he was muttering, but Katsuki was too far away to hear what he was saying. His pen flew rapidly across the paper with sure strokes. He showed none of his old nerves. Whatever had happened in the past 2 years had changed him in more ways than one. Izuku was having a decent day. Sure, it sucked being back at Aldera, but his new confidence was throwing off his would-be tormentors. Even Bakugo hadn't bothered him yet. Lunch had gone off without a cinch, and he got to enjoy his bento in peace. He hummed quietly to himself as he gathered his stuff at the end of the day. He looked up from zipping up his backpack when he heard footsteps approaching. It was Bakugo. Well, apparently his good luck had run out. "Do you need something?" Izuku asked coldly. slinging his bag over his shoulders. Where the hell were you? You've been missing for 2 years. And why the hell do you have that dog? Bakugo snapped, gesturing at Clover, who was standing at Izuku's side. I left, and I need Clover, because I'm partially paralyzed from the waist down, Izuku said. Bakugo looked shocked. How the hell did that happen? Izuku glared at him coldly and started towards the door. I took a swan dive off the roof. With that, he left, leaving Bakugo alone. Katsuki stared at the sidewalk as he walked home, mind whirling. Midori had tried to kill himself because of what Katsuki had said, and now he was paralyzed. It was all his fault. What kind of hero did what he had done? Katsuki's vision started going blurry, and he struggled to blink back his tears. His throat felt tight and his eyes burned. His fault. His fault. His fault. Katsuki, don't slam the door. Are you crying? His mother demanded as he entered the apartment. Katsuki glared at her. I'm fine, he snapped, kicking off his shoes. I'm going to my room. He stalked to his room, slamming his door shut and throwing himself onto the bed. He pulled his pillow over his head and curled in on himself as the tears began to fall. He could almost hear Midoriya whispering words he had never spoken. Your fault. Your fault. Your fault. Hitoshi forced his hands to not shake as he grabbed the ridiculously tiny wire in his tweezers. Mei and Izuku were hovering around him, eyes fixed on his work. You need to connect it to the third port from the right, Izuku instructed. Any other and the whole thing will probably explode. How can you enjoy this? Hitoshi demanded. Mei shrugged. I don't know. It's just fun. Normally Hitoshi would leave the building of support items to his friends, who were better at it and actually enjoyed it, but this was a special case. Hitoshi's quirk only worked against people, and there was a fair chance he would fail the practical portion of the hero course exam without a support item if it didn't involve that. It wouldn't have been too hard to get him one, but the rule was that applicants had to build their gear themselves, or it wasn't allowed. Of course, Izuku and Mei had immediately determined, because of the wording, that as long as Hitoshi put the thing together himself, it didn't matter if they designed it, or if they instructed him over his shoulders the entire time. Which was why he was now sitting in Mei's garage, leaning over a half-built electric Eskrima stick. If he didn't mess it up, it was going to be powerful, like knock out a full-grown grizzly bear powerful. Hitoshi held his breath as he slid the wire into place. He released it when after a few seconds there was no smokes or sparks or explosions. He jumped a foot into the air when the door to the house slammed open. Mei spun around and glared at the interloper, her little sister, Amarante. She was 10 years old and had inherited their dad's quirk, Grow. It allowed them to accelerate the growth of any plant. As a result, the house was filled with plant life. Amarante! I told you to knock! You could have caused an explosion or ruined our project! Mei scolded with crossed arms. Amarante rolled her eyes and tucked a lock of her shoulder-length white hair behind her ear. Mom says you three need to come eat lunch. And if you don't, you'll be banned from the garage for a week. Fine, tell her we'll be there in a minute. We need to clean up and turn everything off. Okay. With that, Amarante shut the door. The three teenagers quickly cleaned up, shut everything down so nothing would catch fire, and left to go eat. Mei led Hitoshi and Izuku to the table, where a couple of platters of sandwiches and sliced fruit waited. Amarante and her twin brother, Kazutaka, were already there. The three teenagers dug into the food like they hadn't eaten in days. Hitoshi had actually forgotten to eat breakfast that morning. Honestly, the way you're eating, I would have assumed you haven't eaten in a week, if I didn't know you three had appetites like starving wolves. Kaio laughed. Her wavy, mid-back length, raspberry-colored hair was pulled into a French braid. She had crosshairs in her gold eyes like May, since the younger had inherited her quirk from the older. Woof woof, Hitoshi said in a deadpan. Izuku choked on his water as he laughed. May smacked him on the back way harder than necessarily, until he fended her off with an apple slice. They quickly finished their meal and retreated back to the garage to continue working on Hitoshi's support gear. He would be getting into the hero course if they had anything to say about it. Alright, y'all. I feel like that's a good spot to end it for now. I hope y'all enjoyed the episode, and if you did, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any suggestions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below, and I answer all my comments, so I hope to see you all soon. Ciao for now.